growing up, it was great having a lot of cousins, but now as an adult, I realize big families suck. They suck ass. You can disagree with me all you want on that, but big families suck. Big Mormon families suck even more. Hi, hello, and welcome back to a podcast where I talk about going from not corporate job to corporate job, but when I talk about rediscovering life in your 30s, the chaos of just existing right now, and a lot of pop culture-y things, but whatever the fuck I want to talk about. You know you love it. Welcome back to Chaos and Fuckery. I almost fucked up the intro again, like always. That's just my normal. But I want to talk about something that I have personal experience with, but I've seen a lot of discourse online about. And that's only childdom. I have seen a lot of parents as of late when I scroll through my doom scrollies, that is TikTok, asking, am I doing my kids a disservice only having one? Do they need siblings? And so many people in the comments that are only children, I'm assuming, and not just trolls on the internet telling people that they need to have more kids. So many people are like, I wish I had siblings every day of my life. I was jealous of the people that had siblings. I wanted the best relationship with my sister. Like, I wanted a brother, blah, blah, blah. Hey, you cannot control the relationship you have with your siblings. If you had siblings, it could have been a horrible nightmare of a time. My dad doesn't talk to half of his siblings. He has 5, one of which is dead. And my mom has 3 siblings, only one of which she has never had an all-out war with where she goes 6+ months without talking to. One of which she has vowed to never talk to again, because of the heinous shit she does. Wishing for siblings as an only child is normal. However, I wouldn't tell parents that, you're doing your kids a disservice for not having more. Because I was an only child, and I never once a day in my life wished I had siblings. I saw people fight with their siblings all the time, and was glad I didn't have them. Obtained step-siblings in my adulthood and still forget they exist because I've never met them and I don't have an interest in being a part of their lives. I have watched my cousins go to war over siblings. I have watched my cousins being parentified to take care of younger siblings, and medically complex younger siblings at that, where medical necessities are chore chart items. There is a lot that goes into the choice to have other kids, and I don't believe there should be as large of a stigma of your kids are going to be lonely, your kids are going to be weird and not know how to socialize for being only children. Is there some weird complexities to being an only child that gets toted around and around adults your entire life when you're a kid? Absolutely. There were many, many times that I didn't realize it wasn't normal to be watching Untold Stories of the ER, and I didn't know it was pregnant. I didn't realize that knowing the knowledge I had from those shows, because my mom watched them all the time and didn't filter anything about my life, wasn't normal. So when I would, my social interactions as a only child also often involved kids looking at me weird because I was forced to watch weird TV shows that, weren't kiddie cartoons. So was I a little awkward and a little weird? Yeah. But I think I would have been awkward and weird just purely who my dad was. I was building computers before I knew, basic math, if that makes sense. I was doomed to be weird. But that wasn't really related to me being an only child. I got to do fun things like grow up on motorcycles, and I got to do fun travel trips because I was an only child and my parents didn't have to pay for 5 kids to go on a vacation. My only vacation wasn't Disney World or a cruise. I got to go places and experience new cultures and get out of the tiny town bubble I was in growing up. And I think largely that was because I was an only child and my parents weren't paying for other kids. I also grew up with 2 extremely emotionally immature and arguably just immature parents as a whole. One was avoidant and one was a drunk. There wasn't really a lot in between, and I'm thankful every day that I was the only one that had to suffer through that, and that I didn't have to try to raise siblings underneath that bubble as well, because I have spent a lot of my life protecting some of my cousins from the behaviors of the people around us. I can only imagine what it would have been like to have to do that with siblings. I would have been their protector, and I would have almost certainly been parentified to raise them when my mother wasn't capable of doing so. Same could have been, and I know that for a fact because I was raising, not literally raising, I was watching and being forced to watch my cousins as young as 8 years old. I was left alone with, infant cousins as young as 8, 9 years old. So I definitely was, while I didn't have siblings to be parentified by, I definitely, in some ways, when I was around my cousins, parentified and forced to babysit and watch kids that weren't mine constantly in time frames that I shouldn't have been. When it comes to the only child conversation, sure, there are plenty of only children out there that think it's the end of the world that they never had siblings, and I think their parents were selfish for not giving them siblings. To me, that gives entitled. To me, that gives you didn't realize the blessing you had being an only child because you didn't watch the chaos of large families around you like I did. I would never give up being an only child. There are a lot of things I would change about my childhood, but having siblings is not one of them. And yes, I recognize as an adult that I will in fact be missing out on a lot of fun adult things like being an aunt, where my kids, if I had them, which I don't and probably never will, having cousins like I did, or I don't know, is there any other things other than cousins and having nieces and nephews that is impacted by me simply not having siblings? I don't think so. Like, a lot of people talk about, being able to go through the pain of losing a parent together and not having to do it alone. I'm the type of person that would rather do it alone. So maybe again, it's just toxic family culture that I've grown up in on both sides of my family. But I watch both of my parents, who one has 5 siblings, one of which is dead, and my dad doesn't talk to any of his siblings on a regular basis, and I couldn't tell you the last time he saw a majority of them. He probably hasn't met a lot of his nieces and nephews because they came in much later in the picture than his own kid did. I know the kid, haven't even met his wife and stepkids, so let alone like his siblings, his mom, anybody else. My mom has 3 siblings, one of which she has vowed to never speak to again. Another she has gone more than 6 months without talking to because of all-out disagreements, wars, fights between them, things that they've done that are just heinous to each other. And the third she really has no issues with, but he just stays out of everything. My uncle just stays out of everything. The 3 girls all bicker and fight all the time, and they're not close sisters and never have been. And of those siblings, my mom is the only one that actually regularly communicates with her own dad. So when they lose their dad, it'll be a big issue amongst all of them. And I personally am of the belief that when they lose their mom, the whole family falls apart. None of us will communicate with each other anymore. And that's not because we have some large amount of property or something that the kids will be fighting over. It's because she's the only thing that holds us together. Quite literally, she is the only reason I have any contact with the rest of my family. I would be no contact with all of them, probably including my mother, if it weren't for, and my cousin, but she's a different story altogether. Her and her husband are a different story altogether, because anyways, would not want to go through something as difficult as losing someone with people I hate. And that is the reality of a lot of sibling pairings. So why would it be a disservice to a theoretical only child out there to give them siblings that they potentially hate? Why would you put your, potentially in some examples, your mental health, your physical health, your ability to potentially be able to parent at all on the line for an uncertain future? Because the future of your siblings could be they hate each other. They don't talk to each other. They're not going to communicate with each other. and give them siblings so that their kids have cousins. Growing up, it was great having a lot of cousins, but now as an adult, I realize big families suck. They suck ass. They really do. You can disagree with me all you want on that, but big families suck. Big Mormon families suck even more. I have always said that if I ever did have kids, which at this point I'm not sure I would, I say kids, it has always been I would be one and done. I have never wanted anything else for me as a human being. As an only child, I never wanted siblings. I cringe at the fact that my mom has tried to bring in multiple people to potentially live with me throughout my teenage years. Like friends of mine that she tried to save from their own environments, my cousin. There are multiple times throughout the history of my teenage years where my mom tried to make someone else my sibling, and I was literally like, I feel for them and I want to get them out of their situation, but like I don't want them to be my sibling or like be in that general vicinity of like sibling tree. No, I don't want that. I was very anti having siblings. And I don't know where that feeling came from because no one ever like drilled that into me. I never wanted them. And I recognize that is unique to my experience, but I also don't think parents should be forcing themselves because they think only children are going to be weird and non-social and a loner, and they're just going to suffer so much in their life without a sibling, when there are lots of us that are perfectly fine with our only childdom and make ways of some of the things we might be missing out on better. Right? I don't have siblings, so I don't have literal nieces and nephews. I don't. Because my husband doesn't have any nieces and nephews either, so I don't even have, like, by marriage, nieces and nephews. However, I get to adopt whoever's kids I want. And I love that for me, because that means I can be like, yeah, no, not my nephew. About one person. Like, my friends' kids, I don't really have friends with kids. I don't. Like, and again, that might just be, my husband and I aren't kid people really. I am not as anti-kid in society as my husband is, but we don't really attract other, like, couple friends or anything like that have kids. And even just friends of mine, none of them are really at that. A lot of my, we're all college graduates and things like that, so later start in life to that kind of stuff if you get there. However, when I do hang out with people with kids, I get to adopt whoever I want. I get to, spoil them rotten if they're kids that I actually enjoy. I get to spend my money on other people's kids and not my own. I get to choose when I spend that money, and I get to choose who my nieces and nephews are. Like my adopted nieces and nephews, because they're not literally my nieces and nephews. Obviously, I understand how bloodlines work, but lots of people adopt nieces and nephews, especially if they're like, the fun aunt or something like that. Like they're just never gonna be in whatever it is. That's rude. Whatever it is, lots of people, friends, like close friends, say like auntie whatever, when they, have young kids or whatever, they kind of train their kids to believe, these are your aunts and uncles, even though they're not really. So far to the point that my dad didn't even realize. I was discussing this with my father recently, and he didn't even realize that, the traditional definition of cousins and nieces and nephews are just your siblings. He genuinely assumed that my cousin's kids were my nieces and nephews. And they're not. Like, some of my cousins, they are, aunts and uncles to some of these kids. Because they're related. They have big families. Me, not so much. Being another child, and I'm okay with that. I am okay. I also married into a family where my husband only has one sibling, but like, realistically, she's not having kids. She's not getting married. We'll be lucky. Anyways, only children are not some, like, leprosy curse. We also shouldn't be treated like handbags, in my opinion. I think some only parents or single child home parents can do better about protecting their kids from being exposed to adult topics too early. I was one of those only children that got toted around everywhere with my parents, and I was constantly around adults, and that's pretty normal for only children because it's easy to, run around with one well-behaved kid versus, a gaggle of them. However, that also made some of my social interactions as a kid very odd because I didn't recognize that most kids were watching cartoons and not, I didn't know I was pregnant in Untold Stories of the ER. I didn't realize that most kids weren't allowed to watch South Park or The Simpsons or whatever TV shows I was watching with my parents. So when I would talk about these things and bring up topics that I didn't realize were taboo for, a 7-year-old to be bringing up, it did create some weird social interaction moments because that was all I knew. I only knew the TV. I didn't really watch cartoons. The only person I watched cartoons with was my uncle. So I didn't really understand kid-friendly things, and I still have to really be careful about that, even around some of my cousins' kids now, because I don't know what topics. Something as silly as I started drinking energy drinks at the age of 8. I have to be consciously aware when I'm around, family kids or other people's kids when they get a little older, like 11, 12, 13, of going, hey, are you okay with them having this? Because some parents just are not okay with their kid having caffeine because they react differently to it, or they've already had too much that day, or whatever. I try to be respectful of parents as someone who doesn't understand traditional, kid boundaries. Because I didn't have them. I was always around adult topics, adult things. I was around drunks. There's a story when I was 5 years old. I think I couldn't have been older than 6 because my uncle was a part of this and he passed away when I was 6. But there's a story everyone loves to tell where my parents and a few family members and a few family friends were in our backyard getting drunk. And no one was paying attention to me. So I looked up the pizza number on the backlog phone call history, and I called to order myself pizza. And everyone loves to tell that story to this day, and they like to claim it as if I was like some genius kid. But the reality is because I was treated like a handbag as an only kid, I was just constantly, I didn't realize that wasn't normal for a 5-year-old to just go do. I was very intelligent when I was younger in the sense that, I cut my hair off specifically, not just because I got a hold of the scissors. I got a hold of the scissors, cut my hair off, and had an exact reason why I did it. I didn't want my mom to braid my hair anymore because it hurt. So I shaved my hair off so she couldn't do it. I knew if it was too short, she couldn't braid it anymore. So there were a lot of, if you put me in a suit as a kid, I basically would have been a mini adult. I didn't have a lot of kid behaviors ever, really. And it wasn't until I got older in my teen years where being at a religious school for my elementary school that didn't talk about normal behaviors, if you will, normal biology. Didn't do the whole puberty conversation like they do at public schools, at least here, that kind of stuff. And my parents weren't having those conversations either, specifically my mother in this case, was not having those conversations with me. That was when the emotional intelligence flipped, that I think having siblings might have helped. I think that's more of a parent, maybe I would have been exposed to it because I had I wouldn't have had older siblings either, though. I would have had younger because I am, the only. Right? And my parents were super young when they had me. So if they had anything older than me, that would have been a different story entirely. But I think older siblings can help in, bridging that gap when it comes to experiencing, those teen years and preteen years. But it's not a do or die situation. That's more of a parenting fail, in my opinion, than it is a not having siblings fail. They're socially, am I a loner now? Let's get into the loner aspect of the only child thing, because there is a big stigma around us, similar to homeschool kids, that only children are loners and that they enjoy being alone and things like that. They're very hyper independent individuals is kind of the stigma around only children. And there's a, you were an only child. I can tell because like you don't share well or whatever. Am I a loner now as an adult? Do I feel like being an only child has impacted who I am as an adult? Am I a loner? Yes, I am. I prefer to be alone. But I do not think that has really anything to do with the only child thing. Because I was in sports, I was around a big family, I was never, in a way, my mom tried to make sure I was never alone, despite the fact that I wanted to be alone. I think my behaviors of being alone would exist if I had siblings anyways, because my dad is very much so a loner. He is very into him, like he likes to be in his own space. He likes to control his own space. He likes to have a routine. He may or may not be a misdiagnostic. I'm just speculating. I don't know. And I do believe I got that from him. I very much so am a loner. I like to be, in my own space. I'm not recharged by social interaction. I am very much so an introvert. I am very exhausted after being in social spaces for a long period of time, unlike my golden retriever husband. I am a black cat. I can be recharged by certain people, but you have to be a person that I genuinely want to be around, and that is hard to come by. I do not believe that has anything to do with me being an only child, though. I really don't. I do, however, think being an only child allowed me to travel the world. Now, I don't think I know that. My parents wouldn't have been able to afford traveling the world and me going to boarding school or my sport, even being a competitive dancer, if I had siblings. It just wouldn't have happened. So a lot of my upbringing was due to me being an only child, and I think that's part of the reason I never wanted siblings. When it comes to, let's think, what other stigmas are there on only children that a lot of parents worry about? I know it's mostly like the loner thing. Being alone when you go to deal with, the death of a parent. I would rather do that alone. I watch my mom, like I said, my mom and her siblings, my dad and his siblings. All they do is fight over that stuff. My mom being the medical person will likely claim that she has some sort of superiority to make decisions, even if she's not the person with power of attorney. There's so many things that I would rather not fight people with. I'd rather just make the decision of clear, sound, like mind of my own and not have other people's opinions come in. And, maybe I think that way because I didn't have siblings. I don't know. But I don't think it stunted me in any way, shape, or form being an only child. A lot of only children will probably disagree with me on this, but I think I was better off. And I think a lot of kids would be better off if they didn't have siblings. I think in some cases, some of the siblings in dynamics absolutely ruin people. You either get that middle child syndrome where they never get over it because they're never like therapized to deal with their feelings or taught even. You don't even have to go to therapy. Their parents don't emotionally regulate them to deal with the feelings of jealousy and things like that. And they become horrible people because of it. Financial issues, you're in this big family that overspends or just in a big family and can't afford to be a big family. And then you grow up and you're so financially insecure that you either overspend to hell and you end up in mountains of debt and then have to deal with it, or you never spend a dime because you're so afraid you're going to be broke one day. There are so many social dynamic issues that I see come from having siblings, being a part of a big family that I wouldn't want ever. And, I don't have the experience of siblings, so I couldn't tell you would my life be better if I had siblings, but I genuinely don't believe it would be. And maybe that's just because I don't believe my parents could have handled having more than one. I don't believe that I would have done well with the things that I enjoy, and maybe I just wouldn't have known any better, right? But I would have been parentified pretty early in my life, and that wouldn't have been fun. I wouldn't have been able to go to the school I went to. I wouldn't have been able to, whatever. There's a lot of my life that would have changed had I had siblings that I don't think I would have wanted to change if I had the power to know all. If I had to choose between having a sibling and choose the life that I had growing up, I would choose the life I had growing up all day, every day. Because not only the stuff of it all, right, the financial aspect of it all, I would not knowing what I know, put another kid through what I went through. And that's not to say that, my parents are these big evil people. It's just, I had two, like I said, emotionally immature and arguably just immature as a whole parents that were emotionally avoidant and mean and drunk sometimes. And my dad was never mean, my mom was. That to some extent, also still to this day in their 50s, can't admit that they did anything wrong. And they have never once a day in their life apologized for their behaviors and the way, and no parent is perfect. I'm not expecting them to be perfect. I wouldn't have expected them to be perfect, but I would have expected some retrospection. And I've always said that if I ever had kids, one was all I was ever going to have. So I've never wanted that. I've never wanted that from a parenting perspective, more than one. And I've always been kind of on the fence of having one at all. So that might be a unique perspective of mine. I just don't see the value in siblings. I don't. It's a selfish thing if a parent continues to have kids just purely because they want more. Granted, the entire concept of having kids is a selfish thing in my opinion, because they didn't ask to be alive in this hellscape. You saying let's populate the world when the world is already overpopulated to hell anyways, there's no real justification. And continuing to have more just because you want more does not mean it benefits your children. One is one thing, but multiple is another. And obviously, I'm not talking about those who get multiples out of the gate or whatever. Even the best parents I know royally fucked up their oldest by having more, one of the ones in the middle by having more. Whatever it is, the best parents I know, this dynamic between them and their kids significantly changed, especially if their kids were older, like who I can even argue, right? I think much past that, you start getting into the line of kids' emotional needs aren't being met. The one-to-one ratio, right? Each parent has a kid to take care of. Past two, you start getting into and obviously this is not science-based, this is just my own personal conjecture of watching other people raise their kids or whatever. You start getting into the dynamic of eventually the oldest is going to be old enough to be parentified and watch all their other kids. The parents don't have to do shit. That happened in my family. There is, even just amongst cousins, right? I don't have siblings. There is a 12-year age gap, I think. Yeah. 12-year age gap between me and the youngest. Guess who had to babysit him when he was an infant? I have watched all of the younger half. Without pay. Well, okay, that's not true. Two of the kids belong to the parents that have the most common sense. So I'm not talking about them. But point being is when you've got kids with such large age gaps, which families have that age gap, that's just grandkids, right? It's not abnormal in large morbid families to have age gaps like that. But when your kids have an age gap like that, your oldest almost always suffers. And then at the tail end, your youngest suffers because no one was there. Like, they got bullied by their older siblings their entire life, and now their older siblings don't want to show up for them at their big moments in life because their older siblings have gone and moved on and have their own lives now. It does no one a service. Not the parents, not the kids. I can give two, but if you are seriously debating, am I one and done? From an only child's perspective, if you are debating it, you're one and done. Continuing to have kids just to give your kids siblings, if you don't want it, and even then it's a selfish thing, but if you don't want it, it's big issue. No, don't put that on your kids, don't put that on you, don't put that on your spouse, don't put that on your relationship. But also, if you do want it, you better be damn fucking sure that you can handle it mentally, physically, financially. Because putting that burden on your existing kids is unbelievably selfish. You are not doing that kid that you have currently any harm by saying, you're the only one for me. Despite what other only children, they were not harmed by having, not having siblings. And of course, I don't mean literally parental abuse and things like that. It is not the end of the world to not have siblings. You're not going to create some weirdo kid that's going to go be a psychopath. You can get that in a line of kids, or you can get that in only children. It has nothing to do with being an only child. Worst case, you have a child that's a little emotionally avoidant and extremely independent because they were taught to be extremely independent because they had no one else to rely on. I'm a little emotionally avoidant because I didn't have to deal with emotions with other people. I was dealing with them internally. So it is hard for me to be in relationships and things like that. But that is more to do with my parenting and lack of therapy and things like that than it does with being an only child. I think properly maintaining my boundaries and things like that, that wouldn't have been an issue. But that didn't really happen. I had a parent that either was the strong arm, strong ass, never allowed to do anything parent, or the party parent that you got away with murder. There was no in between with mine. So that is very much of a parenting issue, not an only child issue. And I think that is where a lot of the stigma around only children comes from. Lack of, especially in young parents, lack of understanding of what the hell they're doing. Let's be real. They now view their child as a pet where they can take them and tow them around everywhere, and they don't have to get babysitters either because they can't afford them or whatever. They don't want to, whatever it is. Their kids get towed around everywhere with them and exposed to adult things that they don't realize their kids are picking up until much, much later when, it starts coming out of their mouth. I think I dropped my first F-bomb at 3 years old because I was around it constantly. Kids are sponges. What do you say? That's not an only child problem, though. That is maybe it is. Maybe it is a parents of only children problem where it is easy to tow around a single kid and not recognize how much they're being exposed to and how much they're picking up. But I think it's also mostly a younger parent issue. I don't think, and maybe I'm wrong, if you're an only child of an older parent that had a similar experience, let me know in the comments below. But I don't think older parents that understand like real boundaries, emotional, maturity, EQ, IQ, that the whole thing is well settled financially, not struggling to make ends meet, blah, blah, blah. All of those things that come with building a family in the right way, no matter how large. I don't think only children from that type of home have as many issues. Are they probably still as hyper independent, maybe a little socially awkward sometimes, whatever? Yes, I would be willing to bet that almost every only child has a little bit issues in social dynamics, especially if they weren't exposed in like daycares and things like that, sports, just purely because it's not something they've been around. Being socially awkward isn't it's not a crime. Some of us just like to be alone. And I feel like that could apply to people with siblings or without. Some people end up liking to be alone because they never got the ability to because they had so many goddamn siblings. So, at the end of the day, I wanted to do this episode to bring some light from an only child's experience. Yes, as an adult, sometimes it pains me that I don't have nieces and nephews that are my own. I see, my cousins getting so excited about having new kids in the family. Hey, I don't get super excited about that stuff. I'm kind of like, oh great, more kids that no one's gonna protect and no one's gonna treat right. And especially in my family where most of them are a part of the church, I'm like, oh great, more kids being brought up in a cult. I don't get excited about that stuff. But there's a part of me that's like, that's cute. You guys all do Christmas together. And Christmas feels so repetitive. There's no doing a tradition doesn't feel the same when you don't have little kids to share that tradition and stuff with. I get it. I do. There's a little bit of that. But also at the same time, I can choose to make new traditions with my husband. We started cruising a lot. I can choose to spoil certain kids without it being called favoritism because they're not my nieces and nephews. I can call them my nieces and nephews all I want, but they're not. So if I'm choosing to, spoil one person's kids because their actual aunts and uncles are shitheads, then I'm choosing to do that. I can spend my money on whoever I want. I have no familial obligation to spend my money on my nieces and nephews or on my own kids or whatever. I have no obligations. I can spend my money on whoever the hell I want, and that's not favoritism. That's literally just spending my money on whoever the hell I want. So yes, there are some downsides to being an only child, but I don't think they outweigh the benefits of being an only child and being independent is not a bad thing. it has helped a lot of what's like going on in my personal life right now and things like that. Being able to be hyper independent is actually helpful right now. So, if you're a parent out there, which why are you listening to me? I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I'm a 30-year-old who, has Funko Pops on my wall. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I just am speaking from the perspective of an only child. If you, as the adult, don't feel you can handle it, do not feel bad for raising an only child. They will be okay. They will be, I'm a college graduate with an engineering degree. Yeah, I do fucking weird ass shit like cosplay, but it's fun. I don't have kids, like I own my home. Like I'm pretty well adjusted, I would assume. By most normal standards. I'm a little weird, but I don't think that really has anything to do with being an only child. It has a lot to do with just I'm weird. So if you've ever, had that thought of, am I doing my kid a disservice? You're not. They'll be okay. Take care of you and then take care of them and they'll be perfectly okay. I have more trauma, scars, whatever, from my parents not taking care of themselves emotionally, mostly. I mean, kind of physically. I have a lot of eating, as the last episode revealed, I have a lot of issues surrounding food and a lot of issues surrounding eating disorders and things like that. And that came directly from my mother and my dance teacher. And, watching family members get on things like Octavia and whatever. So yes, that did come from my female lineage on my mom's side of the family, but that would have come regardless of if I had siblings. That has nothing to do with being an only child. So yeah. Take care of you as a parent so that you can ensure that you pass on the best of you to your kids and they don't see the worst of you. That's where that decision should lie. Because being an only child is not a bad thing. We're not gonna, hate you miserably for not giving us siblings. And if we do, entitled as fuck. Again, I think that's a parenting issue if your kid comes out and absolutely hates you for not giving them a sibling when there's so many other things in the world. Make your own siblings. I had friends that were basically siblings. I brought friends everywhere growing up. Ironically, most of the friends that I brought everywhere were friends with big age gaps between them and their siblings because they were basically an only child by the time, there was no worry about what was fair. Anyways, families are chaos and full of fuckery. But if you want to keep yours small and close to the heart, don't worry about your only children. I mean, they might be a little feral, so worry about them in that sense. We're definitely all a little, every only child I've met is a little feral. But that's not a bad thing either. So, that is it for today's episode of Chaos and Fuckery. I just wanted to talk about it because it's an interesting topic that I have a unique perspective on as an only child. Everyone wants to speculate on that we're so weird and whatever, but only children, I think we're superior. So, on that note, have a good one, and I hope you go get into lots of chaos and find some fuckery.